My fellow dungeon masters, let me paint you a picture. Your party is exploring a dimly lit dungeon, their eyes keenly scanning for traps and treasures. The rogue spots an ornate chest at the end of a narrow corridor, and sensing opportunity, she approaches cautiously. But just as her fingers brush against the intricate lock, the chest suddenly sprouts teeth and a long, sticky tongue. It's a mimic. The party springs into action, but the mimic's surprise attack has already caught the rogue off guard. They struggle to break free, and with each attack, it becomes clear that the mimic is little more than just a one-trick pony. Sure, it surprises the players and holds them in place, but the shock wears off, and then the encounter just turns into a monotonous slugfest. Sound familiar? If you've ever set up a mimic encounter only to feel like it fizzles out after the initial surprise, you're not alone. The basic Mimic Statblock from 2014 may deliver that initial shock, but it's missing the depth and versatility to keep your players truly engaged. And in today's video, we'll revamp the Mimic with new tricks and tactics that will turn this classic monster into a real game changer. I'm DM Dungeon Mastery, and this is my Mimic. Alright, well, without further ado, let's get into the 2014 Mimic Statblock, and let me just start off by saying, I don't by any means think that this Mimic Statblock is actually bad. I just think that there could be more that could be added onto it. So, with that out of the way, first thing we're working with here is a medium monstrosity, which is strange because I'm pretty sure these are aberrations. They come from the far realm. We have an armor class of 12, hit points 58, speed of 15. It's incredibly slow. I actually found a solution to this, but it's a loreful solution. You'll see on my stat block. It's actually pretty interesting. The ability scores are all great. No problems there. It actually has a stealth skill, which is nice. It's lacking a perception skill, being that it's a creature that is covered in eyeballs all over its body. I'm giving it that on my stat block. Damage immunity is acid. It cannot be prone. It has dark vision of 60 feet. Challenge rating 2. I also made a conscious effort not to make my Mimic deal more damage or cause it to be stronger than a CR2 creature. So that's a good thing. I made that trying to get away from making my creatures too strong, but also I want them to be more interesting. So the first ability here, we have Shape Changer. The Mimic can use its action to polymorph into an object or back into its true amorphous form. Its statistics are the same in each form. Any equipment it is wearing and carrying isn't transformed or reversed to its true form if it dies. Okay, good. That's good enough ability. They actually can only polymorph into things that are made of stone or wood in their lore, but apparently here it says that they can polymorph into any object, which means that technically they could polymorph into anything that is not a living creature. Then it has Adhesive. This is honestly my favorite ability about the Mimic. It adheres to anything that it touches. A huge or smaller creature adhered to the Mimic is also grappled by it. And then the escape DC is 13, and ability checks made to escape this grapple have disadvantage, so it secretes this enzyme that makes it incredibly sticky, almost like a super glue, but it can stop secreting this enzyme at any time in the lore, so I actually made a couple minor changes to Adhesive, you'll see. I also don't like how it's only in its object form that it can use this. It doesn't make sense. Why wouldn't it have that when it's not in its object form? Then we have False Appearance. Keep in mind, this says while the Mimic remains motionless, it is indistinguishable from an ordinary object, meaning even if your players walk into a room and they make a perception check and they roll a natural 20, they cannot tell if the Mimic is not a chest or not, or a door, or a cabinet, an armoire. They cannot tell. There is no way to tell. Keep that in mind. Grappler. Mimic has advantage on attack rolls against any creature grappled by it, And then we come to my classic part of every video so far that I've made on creatures. It's the lack of actions that make the fights dynamic. So here we go with Pseudopod. If it hits a creature, it deals bludgeoning damage. If it's in its object form only, it is subject to the adhesive trait, so it gets stuck to the Mimic and grappled by it when it gets hit with a Pseudopod. Now, that's all well and dandy, but why does it have to be in its object form? There's really no reason I can think of that would make it have to be in its object form. We'll see when we get to my stat block, but then we have a basic bite attack. This is the higher damaging attack on the stat block. It does a d8 piercing plus 1d8 acid damage, and that pretty much does it for the 2014 stat block. It's a pretty iconic creature, but I feel like it's lacking a dynamic fighting capability. It only has 2 different things it can do. It's really still just coming down to the players surround it and they beat on it until it dies. So I'm going to change that and fix this stat block up, give it the polish that it deserves. Let's get into it. And here we are in DM Dungeon Mastery's Mimic stat block. You can see there's a lot of similarities right off the bat. I didn't make too many changes. I don't like to fix things that aren't broken per se, but I do like to upgrade the things that maybe need just a little tweaking. So the only thing I added in the skills category is a perception proficiency. I just think it should have that, being that it has eyes all over its body. It makes sense to me. Also, I'm going to be changing this monstrosity to a... we'll do it in the video live so you guys can watch me do this. We're going to change this to an aberration because I'm pretty sure it should be an aberration. Yep. So there's that. And okay. Now we go to the abilities. The abilities or the passives, whatever you want to think of them as. So the first thing, I changed adhesive to adhesive enzyme. This kind of helps you visualize more what is happening with this passive. As a dungeon master, I like to give myself more descriptors to help me visualize things. It helps me roleplay them better. We have the Mimic secretes an adhesive enzyme that allows it to adhere to anything that it touches. A huge or small creature. Adhere to the Mimic is also grappled with disadvantage on the ability checks to escape. You can also notice that I took out the obligatory in object form only because that was pointless to have that in there. And I also added a secondary thing at the end here that says the Mimic can choose to stop adhering to a creature and release its grip as a free action. So it can just stop secreting the enzyme at any time like it does in the lore. Shape changer. I did not make any changes to this. That is the same exact ability because it didn't need to be changed. We have false appearance. I added a little tidbit at the end here for newer dungeon masters, or just as a reminder to people that you cannot detect a Mimic even with a perception check of a natural 20. You cannot tell that it is not a chest from across the room. You cannot tell that it's not a chest when you get up close to it. The only way you can tell is when it comes out of its state, or if you were to stab the chest beforehand. Then we go down to Grappler. It's the same exact ability again. It did not need changed, and now we're going to move on to the actions. Okay, in the actions category, I took a couple of creative decisions of my own to make a couple changes here. So I actually had a bit of inspiration from Baldur's Gate 3 for the pseudopod attack. It is the exact same attack with these changes. So it has now, instead of a 5-foot reach, a 10-foot reach. If the target is large or smaller, it is pulled up to 10 feet closer to the Mimic and is also subjected to its adhesive enzyme trait. So I sort of took Thorn Whip and added it onto the pseudopod stat block with the addition of it gets grabbed by adhesive enzyme. So now when a creature tries to run away, or the Mimic, while it's slowly moving itself along the ground, attempts to lash out and grab something, it can pull it towards it, which I also forgot this one last thing in the abilities. I did give it a 15-foot climbing speed because it can stick to walls, so there's nothing saying that it can't stick to a wall and climb up the wall, so that's a little thing I forgot to mention with that. But anyways, back to the actions. We have the bite attack. No difference other than I added that it is also subjected to the Mimic's adhesive enzyme trait. If the pseudopod gets you stuck to it, the bite should also. You're sticking your hand in its mouth. So here's the first unique ability of the Mimic. This is just a backup, inconsistent ranged attack in case it needs it. It is acidic globule, and I have to change this here, I see, but the Mimic spits a globule of acid at a point within 30 feet. The acid spreads in a 10-foot radius. Each creature in this area must make a dexterity saving throw, or they take 2d6 acid damage on a failed save, or half as much on a successful one. Just a little ability where I can imagine it spitting out the acid. I didn't make this deal more damage than anything else the Mimic can do, so this is not making the Mimic technically more difficult, so I did not increase its challenge rating. I just gave it more things to do, so it's not as predictable. And I got the acid part from the bite attack. If it has acid in its bite attack, it should be able to like spit the acid out, just not as consistently. Now here's the really fun thing that comes from some of the lore with the Mimic. Mimics move around through the Underdark by slingshotting them around. I got this from an AJ Pickett video on the Mimics. If you want to learn more about the lore, you should go watch his video, AJ Pickett. The first part of Slingshot I have is Creature Launch. The Mimic can use its action to launch a grappled creature up to 30 feet in any direction. So remember, if they touch the creature, they get adhesively grappled to it. So the launched creature must make a dexterity saving throw or take 2d6 bludgeoning damage and be knocked prone. And this should not have a plus in it. I have to change that. On a successful save, the creature takes half damage and isn't knocked prone. So it's like the Mimic is trying to fight off multiple creatures at once, but it only wants to focus on that one target that it really wants to eat. So it takes the fighter and it throws him across the room to keep him away from the rogue that it's trying to devour. I think this adds way more dynamic to the fight. Trust me, it absolutely does. It really makes the Mimic more than just, okay guys, surround him and beat him until he dies. This is a lot more of a fun ability. And imagine if you have multiple Mimics only trying to eat one creature at a time. It's a pretty fun ability. Now we have that is it for the actions, and we are moving on to the bonus actions. Alright, we have our singular bonus action here. This is how the Mimic moves around through the Underdark, or maybe through a forest or anything of that nature. We have Slingshot Self-Launch. The Mimic can use its pseudopods and adhesive enzymes to latch onto a surface and launch itself up to 60 feet in any direction as a bonus action. This movement does not provoke opportunity attacks. So now, the Mimic has a way out when it is surrounded by a bunch of fighters and rangers or whoever trying to beat down on it. The barbarian wants to split the Mimic in half with his great axe in 2 attacks. Well, he's going to have to put in a little bit more work, because now the Mimic can launch itself away when it's in absolute danger from being bisected by the barbarian. This makes the Mimic a bit more slippery. It's a bit more dynamic of a fight, if you will. Now we move on to the reactions. This is a really interesting, fun one. I also got this one from Baldur's Gate 3, the idea. Anyways, and this is Swallow Object. When a creature affected by the Mimic's adhesive trait is grappled by it, the Mimic can use its reaction to latch onto an object the creature is holding with its pseudopods and swallow it. The object remains inside the Mimic until it dies or spits it out during a short or long rest. I don't have a saving throw for this because I feel like once you're adhered to it, the only way you're getting away from it is when you break out with the grapple check. So I think thematically, the Mimic is a treasure chest most of the time, and most of its artwork, it should be able to swallow your items. and then potentially if the Mimic gets hurt, it could slingshot itself away and run away with the fighter's magical longsword, and then that becomes a quest in and of itself, trying to figure out where the Mimic went. He took my longsword, I gotta go get it back. Come on guys, let's go. And it just adds I think a very flavorful, fun ability to the Mimic stat block, now making it less of, okay, the Mimic does a pseudopod attack and it bites and then it gets surrounded and beat on because it only has 15 feet of movement speed. Now the Mimic can climb up a wall, it can slingshot itself across the room, it can slingshot a creature across the room, all while not doing immense amounts of damage to just one-shot a player character, because it is only a challenge rating 2 creature. This just makes it a more fun and dynamic challenge rating 2 creature. So yeah, let me know in the comments if you're going to use this guy in one of your games. If you do, tell me how it went. I want to hear about, you know, the barbarian with his blood axe getting it stolen and the Mimic runs away, or the Mimic launches itself and lands right on top of the wizard and tries to eat him. Yeah, let me know some of your scenarios there, and if you like this video, please remember to like, subscribe, hit that notification bell, leave comments and suggestions for creatures that you want to see updated and polished up by me, because I love doing it. Anyways, I will catch you guys in the next video. Thank you.